Thank you for joining us in This Week in Turkey. I am Murat, Türsan. Starting with breaking news, main opposition party CHP chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has made a surprise visit to SADAT headquarters. SADAT is a self-proclaimed private military defense consultancy firm that provides special forces training, military standardization, and logistics systems, and much, much more, founded by former Brigadier General Adnan Tanrıverdi. SADAT is often referred to as Erdogan's shadow army and has been alleged to be training Islamist jihadists in the Middle East. Kılıçdaroğlu made another one of his famous surprise visits today and demanded answers from SADAT. He, of course, like previous times, was not allowed into the building. Kılıçdaroğlu spoke to the press outside and said, "I want everyone to know Turkey will not be surrendered to paramilitary organizations." Kılıçdaroğlu went on to say, "I came here to find out who is funding them. What are their resources? How many people did they train as saboteurs? How many terrorists did they train?" But they closed their doors out of fear. So, Kılıçdaroğlu, in no uncertain terms, has accused SADAT, an organization thought to have close ties to the president, with training terrorist groups. We will keep you updated as the story develops, but we'll go back to our original programming for now. So, tonight, we're politics heavy, folks. We've got the latest political polls. Refugees continue to steer Turkish politics. CHP's Istanbul chair is convicted to a prison sentence. And our guest tonight will be Medyascope's very own Edgar Şar. Our first story tonight, according to polls, the ruling party AKP still holds the lead among all other political parties in Turkey, despite the fledgling economy, the public resentment of migrants and refugees, and just general out-in-the-open corruption. However, when it comes to polls on the presidential race, there is a contender on the opposition side. If you follow Turkish politics closely, you can probably guess who that is. That's right. According to polling by Metropol Research, all likely opposition candidates are losing against President Erdogan, except, of course, one. That's CHP's Ankara Mayor Mansur Yavaş. Yavaş, a former member of the Nationalist MHP party, now CHP's rising star, is the only candidate who looks like has a shot against Erdogan. This is not the first time Yavaş has been floated, of course. Even Ümit Özdağ, the chair of the Anti-Immigration Victory Party, has endorsed him as a candidate, to a lukewarm reception from Yavaş, of course. Yavaş has never publicly announced his candidacy and has repeatedly said that he has no presidential aspirations, but he does consistently win in most polls and garners votes from almost all demographics. Now, let's go to those numbers.
According to the reporting by İsmail Saymaz from Halk TV, Metropol's research was conducted in 26 cities and polled 2,164 people. The poll asked, which party would you vote for if there were parliamentary elections this Sunday? The breakdown is 25.2% for AKP, 17.6% for CHP, 14.6% for İYİ Party, 9.7% for HDP, and 5.7% for MHP. According to the survey, the Deva Party receives 1.5% of the vote. The Felicity and Welfare parties receive 1.1% each, and the Future and the Victory parties 0.5% each. When the undecideds, protest votes, and no answers were distributed, the polls are as follows: AKP 32.1%, CHP 22.4%, İYİ Party 18.6%, HDP 12.3%, MHP 7.3%, Deva 2%. Others are below 1.5%. The polls asked the respondents three option combinations for the presidential race, meaning who the voters would prefer between President Erdogan and HDP Selahattin Demirtas and four potential candidates from the opposition. If Mansur Yavaş runs on the opposition, Yavaş gets 44%, Erdogan 34.3%, and Demirtas 13.3%. If the candidate is İmamoğlu, Erdogan gets 37.5%, İmamoğlu 36.2%, and Demirtas gets 13.8%. Yavaş is collecting votes from both the opposition and HDP voters. The assumption that Yavaş can't win the votes of HDP members is completely unrealistic. Yavaş gets votes both from the opposition and HDP voters, rendering the assumption that Yavaş wouldn't be unable to get the Kurdish vote unrealistic. If the candidate ends up being Akşener, Erdoğan gets 38.6%, Akşener 34.2%, and Demirtaş polls at 16.3%. And if Kılıçdaroğlu runs, Erdoğan gets 40.1%, Kılıçdaroğlu 30.2%, and Demirtaş 15.2%.
Continuing on with politics, CHP's Istanbul provincial chair, Canan Kaftancıoğlu, has been convicted to 4 years and 11 months. Although she is not expected to serve the sentence, she will most certainly be barred from politics for the rest of her life. And of course, Kaftancıoğlu's crime, again, is speech. Kaftancıoğlu has been convicted of spreading propaganda for a terrorist organization, insulting a public servant, insulting the president, and insulting the state. The reasons being a TV interview from 2013 and several other tweets from 2013 to 2014. Kaftancıoğlu was charged by the Istanbul court in May of 2019, right after the Istanbul mayoral elections, which CHP won. Not handily, but it was the first major victory for the opposition in decades. Kaftancıoğlu is an important figure in the party. She is right up there with party chair Kılıçdaroğlu, Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, and Ankara Mayor Yavaş. Now, CHP defends that she will continue to serve her duties, but the legality of that remains unproven at the moment. And here are the details of that story.
Değerli dostlar, kıymetli yol arkadaşlarım.
CHP's Istanbul Provincial Chair Canan Kaftancıoğlu has been convicted by the Court of Appeals for charges of distributing propaganda for an armed terrorist organization, insulting a public official, insulting the president, insulting the Turkish government, and inciting hate. Initially convicted to a 9-year, 8-month sentence for additional charges, Kaftancıoğlu has been hit with a 4-year, 11-month prison sentence. Additionally, Kaftancıoğlu will receive a lifetime ban from politics, unable to hold a position in any political party or hold office. However, despite the conviction, Kaftancıoğlu's sentence is expected to be commuted. Kaftancıoğlu will likely only have to report to prison and be released immediately after. Kaftancıoğlu responded to the decision by the appeals court. We will continue to work until we send out the evil in power and restore the law in this country, not only for Canan Kaftancıoğlu, but for the 84 million people. Never, ever lose hope. Upon the conviction, CHP Chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu ordered through Twitter, all CHP ministers depart to our Istanbul provincial headquarters immediately. Standing next to Kaftancıoğlu and Istanbul Mayor İmamoğlu, Kılıçdaroğlu held a press conference at the provincial headquarters.
Together, all of us together, we will end oppression, all of us together. People in the east, the west, the north, and the south. We will walk down this road with every citizen with a conscience. I speak to the governors, to the governor, to Erdoğan. Your cruelty and arrogance is coming to an end. I will tell you, your cruelty and arrogance is coming to an end. Erdoğan, do you hear the sound of coming storm? That's the sound of the people whose neighborhoods you sold to refugees. It's the sound of our retirees you left hungry. It's the sound of 4 million people you left without electricity, screaming from the darkness. That sound you hear ringing in your ears is the sound of millions in pain. Do you hear the rage of these peoples whose futures you have stolen? Do you hear the sounds of people singing for freedom?
And if you haven't gotten your fill of Turkish politics, it has indeed been a busy week. Arguably, the story of the week has been Turkey's premier anti-immigration party Victory Party chair Ümit Özdağ straight up challenging Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu to a fistfight. No, that's not a proverbial thing or a turn of phrase that doesn't translate well. Özdağ, in so many words, pretty much told Soylu to come get these hands and was in front of the Ministry of Interior headquarters calling Soylu out. Reason? Soylu announced on a TV show that he was going to investigate the Victory Party and called Özdağ something we can't really translate or say on air, but he basically made up a portmanteau that I'm sure he thought was very witty, calling him a George Soros shill and a son of a you-know-what in one sentence, which in Turkish are definitely fighting words, even without the Soros part. But that's not all that happened this week. Refugees continue to steer Turkey's headlines, with around 85% of the population saying that they should go back home. No wonder the Victory Party is making headlines and the opposition coalition is capitalizing on the anti-refugee sentiment. Perhaps not as aggressively as the Victory Party, whose sole platform is basically sending refugees back, but they're pretty much only disagreeing on the details. Meanwhile, a couple of weeks ago, it was looking like President Erdoğan was finally caving into public pressure and for the first time said that the government was working on sending refugees home honorably. But of course, he reverted back to his original position this week and exclaimed that he would actually be doing no such thing. If you're not familiar with the Turkish president, this is not the first time he has rapidly shifted positions. So here's what went down this week.
Refugees and migrants once again steer the country's discourse in Turkey. Auctioneer stated in her party's weekly group meeting, after a 20-year rule, they turned our country into the Middle East. Our nation has turned into a ditch for human smugglers thanks to AKP. If Syrian refugees stay here, given their birth rate, there will be 35 million people of Syrian ethnicity here by 2053. Our goal is not to exile Syrians back to their country in an inhumane way. It is to make their returns easier. Main opposition party chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu commented likewise. I am clear on fugitives and asylum seekers. They will leave. The culprits of this issue are Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and European countries. It is their deception. President Erdoğan, having changed course on refugees only 2 weeks ago, saying that he would ensure their honorable return back to their country, reversed course once again and responded to Kılıçdaroğlu saying, "We will never push back these people who are currently in our country as refugees. Neither will Mr. Kemal nor his supporters. We will continue to open our doors. Anyone who wants to return on their own will return. But we never surrender them to men with guns."
Türkiye Cumhuriyeti tarihi açısından.
Meanwhile, the single-issue anti-immigration party Victory Party chair Özdağ called the Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu out. The Interior Minister announced on television that he was starting an investigation into the Victory Party, calling Özdağ a Soros shill and a veiled profanity concerning his mother. Not to be outdone, Özdağ challenged Soylu to what many assumed was a fistfight in front of the ministry headquarters. Özdağ tweeted, "Süleyman, I will be alone and unarmed in front of the Ministry of Internal Affairs tomorrow at 11. If you have an iota of courage, wait for me at the ministry gate without hiding behind the honorable Turkish police. The whole Turkish nation will see who is a son of what."
And now to untangle this ball of yarn that we call Turkish politics. You know him, you love him. Domestic politics extraordinaire, Medyascope's very own, Edgar Şar. Edgar, thank you for joining me in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Edgar, I want to ask you a couple of things. Let's start with the polls. Now, depending on what poll you look at, AKP is still the most popular party in Turkey, despite the fledgling economy, despite the refugee crisis being the #1 topic in most polls. But let's move on to the presidential race. We know that AKP is winning on the parliamentary level. But even though the opposition is mostly losing the presidential race, almost all candidates are, there is one exception, and that's Ankara Mayor Mansur Yavaş on the CHP side. Now, so far, AKP hasn't really done a lot of smear campaigns or anti-propaganda against Mansur Yavaş. Now, really, the question is, do you think that Mansur Yavaş is kind of too big to hit, or have they really decided that Mansur Yavaş is not running at all because he is the only candidate who's winning? So what are your thoughts? Is Kılıçdaroğlu going to run, or is it Mansur Yavaş?
Well, first of all, when you say that he is the only one who wins, you mean the first round?
Yeah, first round, for sure.
But if we are talking about who will win the presidential elections, of course we have to think about the second round as well. And as far as I am concerned, I am among the ones who still think that it is still very much probable that the opposition will come up with a single candidate with HDP nominating no one and supporting the single candidate of the Nations Alliance of the Six Party. So in that case, actually, it's not only Mansur Yavaş, but also other possible candidates who have a real shot at winning against Erdoğan. So this is the first thing. But about the question on Mansur Yavaş, well, to answer that question, first of all, we have to understand who Erdoğan would like to have as his competitor in the elections. Well, it's, of course, it would be very much speculative what I will be saying right now. It's just a brainstorming. Yes. Yeah. In my opinion, İmamoğlu, for example, is the only one in Turkish political history that won against Erdoğan twice. So it is very important. So we have to note this. On the other hand, Yavaş and also other candidates also won against Erdoğan, his propaganda, his own candidates, so it's also very much important. But İmamoğlu has been attacked very much by the state institutions, by the media empire of the ruling elite, ruling party. Despite these attacks, his support is, in my opinion, very good. I mean, when you compare it with that of Mansur Yavaş. Mansur Yavaş has that level of support with no attack, with no attack by the government in the sense that, İmamoğlu is attacked, right. So in that case, in order for us to make a real measure between the candidates, who is a better candidate, we have to take this also into account. And in the polls, Yavaş support level is, yes, very much high, but also there is something that I think of this level of support. Maybe there may be many people who, participants of those polls, who say that they support Yavaş, but who are also traditionally in the voter base of Mr. Erdoğan. Mm-hmm. So, for this group of people, we never know if Mr. Erdoğan, through campaigning or through his convincing capabilities, I don't know, will again persuade them during the campaign to vote for him.
Right, so don't put too much stock in polls, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when we take into consideration all these factors, we may not reach the conclusion that Mr. Yavaş is the only one who has a shot at winning against Erdoğan. So, and Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu is still very much on the table, his candidacy, I think. Even if his numbers are not as good as the other two probable candidates, but I think it's still very early because now almost everyone in the opposition camp agreed on the proposal of Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu that the candidate will be determined by the six-party alliance, the six-party table, as we call it in Turkish. So the leaders will decide. So we will have to wait for their decisions. And I am also among the ones who think that it's still early to announce who the candidate will be. But I think that the opposition and the six-party alliance should start as soon as it's possible to discuss about these three possible candidates, because as long as we are talking about only three possible candidates, I mean, the more we talk about them, the more difficult it will be with time to have a possible fourth candidate. So they will have to consider each of them their chances, their possible advantages and disadvantages, their capabilities, their opportunities, their threats, everything. Now they are not doing this because they are campaigning all possible candidates, including Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, because Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, as a kind of the leader of this six-party table, he is campaigning right now. He's campaigning to ensure his own candidacy. So nobody is doing this. If he's not doing this, then nobody will be doing this. So my concern is that it will be too late when they start discussing about a possible candidate. So yes, we will see. But as far as Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu is concerned, I think the candidacy of Mr. İmamoğlu or Mr. Yavaş will be very much difficult because for him, they were elected as mayors. They have pledges that they gave to the public. They will have to, keep their promises until the end of their term. So which automatically disables the possibility of their candidacy. But this is Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu's thinking. But when we are only 6 months away from the elections, I'm sure that Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu will also look at every possible data that he has and will decide accordingly. I don't think that he will. He's got blind to see nothing, to see the realities. He will see the realities and he will decide accordingly. But I don't have any speculation about the reality because Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu may be also as popular as it is necessary for an opposition candidate to run for president when the time comes. I don't know, maybe. Right. Yeah, he is waiting for that.
All right, so let's not call this election right now and run to the polls when the time is necessary, and it looks like it's going to be a little while until we have something definitive.
Yes.
All right, so let's move on to Canan Kaftancıoğlu. Kaftancıoğlu was sentenced to 4 years, 8 months, if I'm not, didn't take my notes incorrectly, and her sentence is likely to be commuted. Looks like she's just going to have to report to prison and come back out. Now, of course, this decision by the judiciary is controversial, to say the least. We've discussed for some time that the judiciary in Turkey is basically an arm of the ruling party, right? I mean, there are opposers of this idea, but this does appear to be the common consensus. So now, the CHP's organizational chief, Oğuzhan Kansalcı, says that this was actually payback by AKP for the 2019 mayoral elections in Istanbul, which AKP lost. To refresh everybody's memories, there were actually 2 elections. The election was recalled. It was close enough to trigger a recall, and AKP lost decisively the second time around.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think about that? Was this actually payback for 2019 Istanbul mayoral elections? Your thoughts?
Well, the reasons for this sentence is some tweets that she sent, years ago.
2013, 2014. They had to dig really far back in order to get them. Yeah.
Yes. If Canan Kaftancıoğlu were not a provincial chair of the main opposition party in Istanbul, I don't think they would do all the business, of digging until 10 years ago. So we have to argue that yes, it's a payback because the loss in Istanbul has become a trauma for Mr. Erdoğan, not only because it's his city, it's where he began personally, his journey all the way to the presidency, but also economically because, AKP's stay in power has been sustained through a network of a transfer of public money, to businessmen, also to the base. It's very, it's a long story.
Let's just say open corruption.
Yeah. So, I mean, after they lost Istanbul, actually that network was damaged seriously, because, Istanbul's metropolitan municipality is actually like the biggest holding of Turkish economy, with all its sources, with all its taxes, and everything. So, I mean, without Istanbul, it's very unlikely that these networks works as it did in the past, which is the case right now, actually, which is also the reason why we are talking about a possible loss for AKP next year. So then it makes sense to call all these things that happened yesterday as a payback. Yes, you're right. But on the other hand, there are also other things to say about why Mr. Erdoğan needed to do this against Ms. Kaftancıoğlu. First of all, Canan Kaftancıoğlu is not a typical politician. She has some principles, and she does her politics with these principles, no matter whether these principles are popular for that specific time or not. So she is doing a principled politics. And also, what she managed to do since she became the provincial chair, she created really a big change in how CHP does its daily politics in Istanbul. Through that change that she created, CHP started to make a kind of retail politics, started to have a real dialogue with the public, with real people, focusing on their daily problems, their economic problems. And Istanbul is a very big city, it's a metropolitan where also a very large middle class is living. And now Turkish economic crisis is a very big problem for them. So Canan Kaftancıoğlu has been focusing on those very problems, maybe even more than CHP's center in Ankara does. So she will be a prominent figure in Turkish politics, no matter the decision yesterday. So that is the reason why Erdoğan or the ruling elite, let's say, decided to impose a kind of ban from politics, even if they didn't, let her go to prison for the jail. So I think it's we have to understand all these factors to understand why all these happen. So she is a very prominent figure so far, and I think she will be even more after the decision yesterday.
Yeah, I just want to ask a little follow-up question. Now, the CHP is arguing that this will not actually affect her position within the party. Now, she can't hold elected office. She can't hold public office, right? But technically, I don't think that she was actually holding elected public office because she was in the party.
Yes.
Now, which leaves the question, was this actually a symbolic gesture by AKP? Will this actually have any effect on her career or effectiveness to begin with? What do you think?
Well, I am not a constitutional lawyer, I'm not an expert of an electoral law, so I don't know, actually, honestly speaking, what this decision will mean for her current post. Actually, will she continue to hold her office as provincial chair of CHP? Well, actually, I don't know, because in the past, all maybe I don't remember, but I don't have, to the best of my recollection, I don't have anything in my memory as a provincial chair getting a ban from politics, because maybe we have never had a provincial chair as popular as Mrs. Kaftancıoğlu. So in the past, all the bans from politics were imposed for either MPs or mayors, for those who hold elected office.
Right.
So I don't know. We don't have any precedent in my recollection, at least. So we will see about this. But in spite of everything that happened, I'm sure that with the decision yesterday, she will be even more prominent. She, of course, her career in politics will not end as provincial chair, but she also, proved to all politicians, all political entrepreneurs in Turkey, what a provincial chair can really achieve. Because, of course, Mr. İmamoğlu, as the candidate for mayor, has maybe the greatest part in this success. But who is the second greatest part? I think it's Ms. Kaftancıoğlu with all the change she created. And also one important point, I'm sure that the ruling elite thinks that with her lifestyle, with what she said in the past, Kaftancıoğlu is a political figure through whom they can easily polarize Turkish society. You know, Kaftancıoğlu is such a figure who can never have a majority in Turkish society. I think this is what the ruling elite think right now. But this is not a personality issue. This is, first of all, an issue of rule of law and a democracy. And Kaftancıoğlu has been working so far for the prominence of those values in Turkey, not the prominence of her own values, of her own personal ideology, whatever, but the prominence of rule of law, supremacy of law, and democracy. So that's why in her activity created the candidacy of someone like Mr. İmamoğlu, because when we compare both political figures, we cannot argue that they are coming from of course they are from the same party, but they are not coming from the same political group, let's say. So, I mean, that proves, as far as I am concerned, that what Kaftancıoğlu has been up to so far is not the imposition of her own ideology or prominence of her own political ideas, but rather than that, the prominence of democracy and rule of law and reinstitution of those values in Turkey.
Gotcha. All right, so in the interest of time, I really want to move on to the last one. I think this is the juicy one this week. Now, refugees, right? There's a refugee crisis ongoing in Turkey, and according to polls, some polls say as high as 90%, some polls say 80%, but nobody says 50 or 40 or 30. Turks want to send refugees back. That much is pretty clear cut. I think it'd be hard to argue that. Now, finally, 2 weeks ago, President Erdoğan had caved into public pressure, right? He finally said that we are working on sending refugees back home. But this week, he backpedaled to his original position, and I do believe that he used the religious terminologies, muhajirs and ansars. We're not going to send them back. Muhajirs and ansars are immigrants, but in religious terms.
Yes.
So it's kind of confusing, and it's hard to pin down where President Erdoğan really stands because he goes back and forth a lot. But, par for course. Now, why do you think he's flip-flopping on this issue so much?
Hard to say, hard to guess, actually. But we have some actually information on how we should think about this issue. First of all, when he said that, okay, we are ready to send back 1 million asylum seekers, Syrian asylum seekers back home. Of course, he was talking about at that time about the construction of some houses, constructed by whom? By, this pro-government, let's say, construction firms. So it's about the continuation and sustainability of the network that I have just mentioned. So that was already planned. That was not as a result. That was not a result of the public pressure or a pressure of political parties in the opposition, or Mr. Özdağ, who just created a party, what we could call a single issue party, even if it refuses this. But we can, in political science, I am very comfortably argue. I can very comfortably argue this, that it is a single issue party.
Let's just say that they're not exactly a big tent party. Let's just go with that.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I think that plan, to send at least 1 million asylum seekers back home was already planned, because the construction of those houses were planned, in advance, or not after what Mr. Özdağ said, but that project was already there. And we know why Mr. Erdoğan comes up with such plans. Well, it's about the giving public money or money of the European Union, I don't know, to those firms. So we know that. So I think he just benefited from the agenda at that time to say that, okay, we are ready to send 1 million asylum seekers back home, to advertise about these projects, I think. So, and what he said previously, that they are not planning to forcibly send back the asylum seekers. I'm not sure if it is a real backpedaling. But what he may aim with such a statement when the majority, vast majority of the public is against the refugees, let's say, or the asylum seekers, well, I don't have an answer, but I can speculate something. Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, as the head of the opposition, the main opposition party, said because they saw that they will be losing in the upcoming elections, they will give nationality, citizenship, to the asylum seekers to let them vote in the upcoming elections. Well, is that the case? I honestly can't say that it's impossible for this government to do anything to stay in power. So I think they can at least think of doing this. Yeah. But the numbers that we have suggest that, you know, it's only a few thousand, 100,000 asylum seekers that they gave citizenship. So it's not enough to win the election decisively.
200,000 is not going to swing any election.
Yes, yes. So maybe they will give more citizenship. We don't know, but we have to follow, you know, these things. Another thing, maybe that all the discussion around the asylum seekers, especially with the participants of Mr. Özdağ to the discussion, actually created some problems, not between the government and the opposition, but rather within the opposition. Because with all his discourses, we can very well argue that Mr. Özdağ is after the votes of the quote-unquote secular sections of the society, which traditionally vote for the parties in the six-party table. So when he steals, quote-unquote, these votes, then it's not Mr. Erdoğan who is damaged, but the opposition themselves. So maybe just by making such statements, such discourses, Mr. Erdoğan is just trying to create some problems within the opposition, driving a wedge between the actors within the opposition, because this is a kind of fault line. There are some parties who are not for a very radical discourse against the asylum seekers, like DEVA or Gelecek Partisi. Gelecek Partisi's leader, Mr. Davutoğlu, is actually the
former prime minister.
Former prime minister, on whose term all these things happen. So he is kind of responsible about this, and of course we know him that then he will be continuing to defend his policy. So all these create some problems within the opposition camp. But what I don't understand about the statement of Mr. Erdoğan, his own base is also very much against the Syrian asylum seekers. All the research, not only the polls, or some qualitative research also shows that. So when he makes such statements, actually, I'm not sure whether his own base like these statements. I don't think they like these statements. No. But Mr. Erdoğan has been an expert of a political entrepreneurship, where he creates the problems and also he just shows up as the one to solve the problems. But it's very risky this time. Mm-hmm. That's why I don't understand.
Yeah, it is definitely a very mainstream issue. Mm-hmm. And I think that Mr. Erdoğan would be hard-pressed that if he doesn't solve this problem. Because it did happen under his term, right? It's kind of hard to brush that away. But At the same time, this is just my own personal opinion, President Erdoğan has been known to be able to garner votes, even though the country is in hard times. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. But, when we are only months away from the elections, then things may change. And another speculation is, let me add this, maybe this is a message to the European Union or other actors outside Turkey, where he says, don't worry, I will not send the refugees back, support me in the elections. But the problem is that the European Union or other external actors do not vote in the elections.
That's true.
Unlike, or as opposed to many conspiracy theorists think about.
It's George Soros.
So they don't vote in, my experience says that those actors, including the European Union, they follow also, like we do, the internal dynamics. And if a change in government seems possible in the next elections, which has not been the case in the previous elections, then they will start, building relations with a possible new government. So they will not very much worry about a possible change in the government. They will not say, oh, we lost Mr. Erdoğan, and with whom will be negotiating? They can negotiate with anyone if the Turkish public is ready to change its government through elections. So I don't think this is also a very persuasive argument that this is a message, because this is a very unpopular statement. We have to admit this. Yeah. And we will see what this unpopular statement will lead us to.
For sure.
Yeah.
Edgar, this has been a pleasure. I'm going to bother you a lot more from now on to come into the studio.
Thank you.
This has been excellent.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
thank you very
for coming
much.
in.
Thank you.
And with that, that's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have been Murat, Türsan, and thank you for joining us.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope, 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.